Bien, buenas tardes a todos. Bien.
So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Fundación Telefónica. On behalf of Random House, the publishing house that is honored to publish Colton Whitehead in Spain. The last two books by Colton have been awarded with a Pulitzer. It's one of the few times that two works in a row get these awards. The Underground Railroad and the Nickel Boys, two hard novels. And as Colton was telling us this morning, he likes to combine hard novels with other ones that are a little bit lighter, so to speak, or softer. And Harlem Shuffle, El Ritmo de Harlem in Spanish, is an extraordinary novel, but with more oxygen, so to speak. It's a great pleasure to have him today with us, and it's a great pleasure to have Montserrat Dominguez. We don't have to introduce her at all, to interview and to have a chat with him. So thank you very much, and Montserrat, the floor is all yours.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all of you who are here, and those of you who are following us in the streaming version. This is a wonderful opportunity. There's opportunity of talking with a writer that I have admired for so many years, especially since the Underground Railroad made my head explode, and that now with the Harlem Shuffle has given me such a marvelous week that has made me enter a microcosmos in a city that portrays the 50s and 60s of a city, a novel full of characters, of people who try not to be what they are condemned to be, and that is full of big and small criminals who traffic with stolen radios, or with furniture, or with power, with influence, or with real state assets, or with highways, or with the World Trade Center. All of that is in his novel that is also full of music and smells of quarters such as that of Harlem's, of neighborhoods such as Harlem. So thank you very much for giving us this novel, for giving us a glimpse of a world in the middle of a transformation of Harlem up until 1964. Welcome to Madrid.
Thanks so much. It's really great to be here. I'm glad you guys came out tonight. I usually spend Tuesday nights at home in my apartment weeping over my regrets, so this is a nice change of pace for me anyway.
Bueno, espero que lo disfrutes esta conversación y
I hope that you enjoy this conversation then, and you stay in Madrid. From where in your imagination is born a character such as that of Raymond Carney? Man who tries to find his place in society, a self-made kid who tries to take care of his family, of his children, and who is surrounded by an ecosystem, which is a shop where he sells aspirational furniture for the middle class in the midst of a complicated neighborhood with a complicated personal history. Where does this character come from with his shadows and his light it is?
Well, before there was Ray Carney, there was just a simple idea to do a heist novel. I was with my wife one day, and I was trying to figure out what movie to rent. And of course, the idea was always Ocean's 11, because I'm always renting Ocean's 11. And I thought, they must have had so much fun doing this heist movie. What if I wrote a heist novel? So I gave myself permission. I had to find a place that became New York in the 60s. I was really sick of writing about the South. After two books, I wanted to write about my hometown. I picked the 60s because there was a race riot in 1964, and I thought my criminals might use that as cover for criminal activity. Then I needed a character, and in a lot of heist movies, you'll meet the character of the fence, the person who receives the jewels and sells them to, kicks them up to jewelry dealers around the world. And in the movies, they'll finish the heist, half the gang is killed, the cops are after them, and they go to the fence, and the fence says, I'll give you 10 cents on the dollar. So $2 million becomes 200,000, and I hate that character, so I thought they'd be a good hero. And I did some research, and it turns out that a lot of fences, these people who are middlemen for stolen goods, often have a legit storefront, and in the back they have their illegal activity. And to me, that spoke of a divided nature. You have a face you put to the world, but of course you have your inner self that you keep secret. And so that became the psychological makeup of Ray Carney. He wants to be an upstanding member of society in the Harlem community, but there's always a voice in the back of his head saying, let's do some crimes.
Eso es.
That's the environment. Not only Carney, but his father is a gangster who is dead, who has disappeared, and has a stronger influence in Carney than he wants to admit. His cousin Freddie, who is more than a cousin, his brother, who is a small delinquent to whom he cannot say no, he cannot refuse him anything. All these characters, Pepper, also his dad's friend, he's a gangster also who ends up becoming sort of father figure, and there's something really human in each of these characters, as there is in Carney. As the shop, they have a back end where there are illegal activities going on, so there are different layers to all of them, and we discover them throughout the book, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, Carney is discovering his own criminal nature. He's accepting it, rejecting it over the three stories in the book. It started off as one heist, but then I kept coming up with different stories and capers, jobs for Carney. And so it became three different adventures in 1959, 1961, 1964. And so the cast, the supporting cast, is constantly rebooting. There's always more people coming in, and I want them to be vivid and rich. And I'm writing 100 years into the lifetime of crime novels, crime movies. There's that first wave of Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler. In the 50s, you have people like Chester Himes, Patricia Highsmith, Elmore Leonard, James Ellroy later, Quentin Tarantino. And so there's already a lot of irony built into the genre at this point, 100 years in. And so they're hitmen, mobsters, corrupt cops, and it was just great to find my own way into the genre and accept some conventions, reject others.
Hay un montón de influencia.
There are many literary influences from thrillers, from the crime novel. Do you think that crime novels are a minor genre because you have non-fiction books, among others, and several novels? And I think that you said, Miguel, that after a very tough book, as a writer, you want to explore other territories. But is this really the crime novel, the thrillers, are really a minor genre, in your opinion?
I don't see, I don't divide books into highbrow or lowbrow, pulp or high literature. I think there's good books and bad books, and there's books you like and books you don't like. So I've written books that are quite serious, books that take off from zombie novels. Should I, as a so-called literary author, be writing a book about zombies? Well, I'm not going to get kicked out of the union if I write a zombie book. We have a brief time on Earth. I should be writing the books I want to write that give me pleasure and not worry about how they'll be received. I already have enough voices in my head saying, putting pressure on me to do a good job. I shouldn't worry about what the world thinks about these different genres. So it's what you make of them. For me, this is really a character portrait of a person just trying to make his way in the world. There are various forces working upon him, class, race, his psychological makeup, his upbringing, and from story to story, all these different forces are working on him and forcing him to think about who he is. Is that a crime novel I just described? A bunch of people get killed, some things get robbed, so that's there, but also this character portrait.
Sí, obviamente está
Clearly, all the problems of race of surrounding this, you have all the issues related to the class where you want to be. Because the book, I think it's going to be published these days. The day after tomorrow is going to be published. So I'm one of the lucky ones who has had the opportunity of reading it already. But what you sense inside this book is an intense will from the protagonist of belonging to a social class that can offer you, such as the sofas that he sells or the coffee tables that he sells, that offers you a future, some sort of tranquility, a way of being in the world, that a person like him who has worked for what he has earned himself what he has, is really looking to get. So when society rejects him, he starts developing this will of revenge, this desire of revenge. It's a real force of nature when he feels that he's been expelled from the place that he wants to belong. And I think that would be one of the key aspects of the novel, the way he is thinking about this revenge after he has not been accepted into a club that he thinks he has the right to belong.
Sure, he applies for membership at a club for well-to-do black businessmen, lawyers, bankers, and he does not get in and decides to take revenge. He's very isolated from his own desires, and he lives. He's very adept at self-deception. So I don't think he thinks he's taking revenge so much as correcting an injustice. That's how he'll, sort of describe it to himself. And in an early part of the book, his cousin Freddie is trying to bring him in on a crime, and his cousin says, "Oh, you're a fence," and he's like, "I'm not a fence. I don't deal with stolen goods. I move used merchandise around." So he's in denial, and that's part of the fun of writing someone like him. The reader, of course, knows what he's doing, and can see through his self-deception, but he refuses to accept who he is, and there's a lot of energy that goes into keeping up that self-deception.
Hablemos de raza.
Let's talk about race, about being black, about Harlem, because part of the novel is connected to certain racial commotion. There are many things that change in Harlem. All the human landscape, the businesses, the drug traffickers get into the neighborhood. And there's something that now in 2023 we see that it's still strong as it was back then, which are the racial riots, the police brutality. That back then in 1964 it was a young 15-year-old boy who was murdered by a policeman, and all this craze that that was triggered in Harlem and that remained within Harlem, because the rest of the city, the rest of New York, was totally unaware of what was going on, of all the riots that were taking place beyond the 125th Street. So there are things that don't change, aren't there, over the decades, such as violence against black people, against young people, and that racism that is permanently installed among the police, among the authorities.
Yeah, certainly we have not addressed our problem with police brutality in America and New York City. That doesn't change. And I am trying to capture certain essential elements of New York City. One of them is how we relate to each other as people, how we relate to each other as people with different ethnic backgrounds. And another thing is really the dynamic nature of the city. You mentioned the World Trade Center. The book opens up in a neighborhood called Radio Row, which was a place for radio and TV hobbyists to go to get new parts for their radios and TVs, and it was demolished to make way for the World Trade Center. And towards the end of the book, we see that World Trade Center crater where the buildings will stand. And of course, as readers in 2023, we know that those towers will fall and be erased, and then something else will take its place. So some things are staying the same, and there's also that background of New York that's in constant change, in constant flux. People are coming and going, buildings are rising and falling, and there's also that great transformative energy I am trying to capture in the book.
Mm-hmm. ¿Cómo está Nueva York?
What would you say, in what shape do you think New York is right now, your country is right now? Joe Biden is the current president of the United States, but Donald Trump has left a legacy that is very remarkable, regardless of the fact that he might want to be part of the next election. And his legacy has opened the Pandora box of supremacism, and you have dealt with this in previous books, but nowadays you would say that supremacists are more visible, they are more outgoing, both in social media and out in the streets. What is your perception as to where that society is heading to, because it looks like they have taken several steps back in the past years?
I think that's how we proceed as humans, definitely. I think we make progress. We can move forward into the future and improve our various aspects of our society, and then we always fall back. And so just looking at Donald Trump and elections, we have Obama, the first black president, and then we elect a white supremacist president. He got 60 million votes. Those people are still there, even if he lost. It's not like racists disappear just because you elect a Democratic president. And then no matter who's in the White House, we still have a very reactionary Supreme Court. We have this insane problem with gun violence, which doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. The climate crisis. So
Yeah, sure.
I still feel a little post-traumatic stress from the Trump/COVID this year 2020. And then when I catch my breath and I think things have gotten a bit better, I can just tick down the list of all the things that are still terrible. So things aren't incredibly better, but they're not as bad.
Okay, pero este shock
Okay, but this PTS is not exclusive from the United States, because the style, the way of doing politics, what Trump embodies, and the school that he has created is impacting several countries, even in Europe. Now we have several political parties and ways of communicating and media, and a part of the society that is also being fed from the different niches that are being created in the social media, and that support a very toxic manner of excluding people who do not have the same skin color, who do not think the same way as you do. We are about to commemorate the 8th of March, which is the World Day of Women, and we see that we have gone back in the way that many people are trying to limit, to constrain women's rights. We know that history works a bit as a pendulum, and sometimes you move forward and sometimes it goes back. But it's pertinent to wonder what world we are leaving to our children.
Yeah, we were talking about children earlier, and definitely my daughter, who's 18, is very pessimistic. My son, who's 9, thinks that, oh, we're going to be moving to Mars because we've killed the planet, and that's what he's 9 years old, and he's sure that we're leaving because there's no hope here. So yes, we are going back and forth. I mean, I think with the defeat of very conservative right-wing administrations in the United States, in Brazil. I think labor in Great Britain seems to be in a resurgence. There was a great sort of rightward shift in the whole world in many different places, and maybe it's receding, but it'll come back. Again, we're in this very precarious place where any kind of advancement is very fragile, and we have to preserve it and protect it, whether it's women's rights or democracy.
Colson Whitehead.
Colson Whitehead is not only a novelist, he has also written scripts for some of his plays, for instance, The Underground Railroad, who has been taken to a wonderful TV show. And this is a very cinematographic type of novel. There is a way of connecting with the new generations that does not only include literature, but also anything visual, movies, TV shows. How do you see younger people approaching your work? Through literature, through books, or more through TV shows?
I didn't work on the Underground Railroad TV show because I was writing the Nickel Boys, and I can only do one thing at a time. But I was very delighted with how it turned out, and it couldn't have come out in a more beautiful fashion. In terms of how younger people relate to my work, it's really mostly through the Underground Railroad and the Nickel Boys. They're being taught a lot in high schools and colleges. The Underground Railroad in particular, because it does touch on so many different aspects of American history, I think is a good way into talking about how America came to be. Through slavery, the disposition of Native Americans, all sorts of things. And then Nickel Boys is very short, and young people like that, older people too. And I think the way that it approaches talking about institutional racism in America, it's a good access point for younger people. I haven't met a lot of young people who have picked up Harlem Shuffle, so you have to tell me if the youth of Spain are taken to it a few weeks from now.
Bueno, confiemos en que sí, ¿no?
Let's trust that they will approach it and like it, because there is a rhythm, there's a music to it. Colson Whitehead has also been has also worked in The Village Boys. That was a medical publication in Manhattan, especially for the underground culture. And I think that you used to write about TV shows, maybe about cinema, and also about music. Is that right?
I was a TV critic. It was like 30 years ago, and back then it was really embarrassing to write about TV. Right now it's critically accepted, but back then you're obviously not fit for any real kind of journalism. But for me, I got to turn my childhood, I was raised by TV and sitcoms, into a job, so I was incredibly excited. And once I started writing about TV, that led to writing about books and music. And the great thing about the Village Voice paper is that if you were there, you could get work, and they would take a chance on a young writer. So I worked with a lot of different people I grew up admiring, these different critics. I learned to collaborate with editors, and that was my real apprentice as a writer, not in a creative writing school, but working to keep myself in beer and cigarettes by writing articles and pay my rent, and also learning from a lot of different types of writers and editors on how to just get the piece and get into the piece into good shape. And it provided me with a lot of good habits I still draw upon today. When you write a novel, no one cares if you're working on it that day or night. So when I was a journalist, I learned how to sit down for 5 hours. Nobody's watching me. No one's making me work except the demands of paying my rent. And so today when I'm writing a book, I know that nobody really cares. I have to become my own boss and make myself sit down. So it was a really great place to learn how to be a writer.
¿Cómo está Nueva York ahora?
What is New York like right now? What is the city like now? Because the city has been transformed, and in the book you reflect some of the great movements, not only about the gentrification of certain neighborhoods, but also about the power of influence, traffickers and money dealers who come from the great privileged families that actually colonized the United States, families with money who can also commit crimes and who do not have any issue with bringing out the gun to defend their interests, or to put a son who is a drug addict in jail in order to move their projects forward. What is your outlook on the city right now? Do you still walk around? Do you still do you think that the Harlem of today has nothing to do with that one of the 60s? What is your view?
I love the city, and I approach it from different ways in different books. And I think if I ever got it right, I could stop writing, because I finally have figured it out. The book is about Kearny, but it's also about the city. And I always hate the cliche when people talk about books like Ulysses and are like, the city's almost a character, Dublin is almost a character. It sounds like such a dumb cliche. But halfway through writing this book, I realized that I guess New York is kind of a character. I have to just accept that and move on. And capturing that incredible dynamism of the city is very important to me. In talking about Harlem, I'm writing about Black Harlem, but the first people who were there in the late 19th century were immigrants from Germany, Ireland, Italy, Jewish immigrants from all over Europe who came for a fresh start. And they entered the middle class, left Harlem. Blacks fleeing discrimination in the South moved to Harlem, and later Puerto Rican and Dominican folks, all sort of living in the same townhouses that the white Europeans lived in, replacing each other, rejuvenating the city. I think it's there when I write about Radio Row versus the World Trade Center. We're seeing before and after this convulsive change. And then if we step back and talk about the New York City now, Harlem is gentrified. 125th Street, the main drag, has the same boring stores you have outside, McDonald's and Shake Shack and The Gap and Starbucks. And the people who are moving in, these young folks who are looking for cheap rent, are the great-grandkids of the first immigrants who came in from Italy and Germany, and the cycle continues. So I had a great time trying to capture that. I was writing, this is going to be the first of a trilogy, so it follows Ray Kearny in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, and I was writing the second book during a pandemic, and so New York City in the 70s, crime is at an all-time high, the city's bankrupt, things are very bleak, but artists are inventing new forms, whether it's hip-hop or disco and punk. These new things are coming into being in the city that's in decline. And I felt that I was part of that tradition in writing the second book of Ray Kearny's story. The city is locked down because of the pandemic. People are fleeing. Times Square is empty. But we're all, I think, all the artists were stuck in our houses trying to figure out what's next. And so I felt very connected to this moment of decline, but also rebirth. And if you're in New York now, walking down the street, you'd never know that this devastating moment happened in our history. New York is laid low and then always comes back.
¿Cómo pasó usted la pandemia?
How did you live through the pandemic aside from writing and working on your project? Because creatively speaking, this meant an opportunity for reconnecting with stories that they had put aside in a drawer, and it gave them time to reflect. And for some people, it was very long and very hard, the feeling of not being able to feed from what was going on the streets.
Well, it's a lot of people have observed, writers observed that nothing really changed from the pandemic. You're in your house all day and working, and then you can't leave the house. It wasn't really different from my usual day-to-day. I usually worked from like 10 to 3, but since I couldn't go outside, I had a second shift from like 4 to 7. So it was very productive. I wrote the second book pretty quickly because nothing else to do. And then of course my kids were trapped with me. My daughter is now in college. There was a time where she was stuck in a house with us, and she wants nothing to do with me now. But for 6 months, she had nothing to do but just be in the house with me. So I look back upon it as we were in a sort of bubble of safety. We were fortunate, and it was also a time to work and then make your daughter hang out with you.
Of course. ¿Y ha experimentado el...
Did you experience the Dordi that you describe, that split dream where some of the plots from this book are plotted? That's inheritance from our ancestors, where you slept in batches by following the rhythms of the sun and the darkness.
Yeah, I'm always finding articles, and I think, oh, can I use that in a book one day? So a couple of years ago, I read an article about Dorvey, and again, it was, before we had electric lights. When the sun went down, you'd fall asleep, and then your body would wake you up for 2 or 3 hours around midnight, 11. You're up for a little bit, and then go back to sleep. And it was called segmented sleep. And it's in Shakespeare, in diaries of the time, people write about it. And to me, it seemed that Dorvey, this period, was a time for criminal activity. I was trying to find a metaphor for Carney's shenanigans, his capers, and that time from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. is the domain of criminals, writers, alcoholics, and insomniacs. And I've overlapped with various groups of those over the years. I'm always trying to find different ways of talking about the inner worlds of the characters, and Dorvey definitely worked.
Creo que lo comentaba mi...
I think Miguel mentioned this before. There aren't many authors who have managed to be awarded 2 almost consecutive Pulitzers with 2 fictional works. How does this pressure act on an author? Because it must be difficult, considering in particular that books have not only very well received by the critiques, but also they have been top sellers, and they have been prescribed. They have found prescribers all around the world. So how does it land on you in order to keep creating after that?
Well, when we found out about the second time, it was during the pandemic, and we couldn't really go out and celebrate. I think for the first time, I didn't cook that night. Instead, we got sushi. That was we got takeout food. That was our big celebration. And the next day, I went back to work. I don't have any hobbies or things I enjoy except working on my weird characters, and so I just went back to work. I think other people's expectations. They don't have much to do with me. So I just keep doing what I always do, which is have an idea and try not to fuck it up. So that's like my mantra, just like, don't fuck it up, Coulson. And so other people may be out there with different ideas of what I should be doing. I shouldn't be writing a crime novel. I shouldn't be doing that. But as I said before, life's pretty short, so I should find the best project for me this year, execute it to the best of my ability, and not worry about other folks.
Bueno, ahora lo que
Now, what you have, aside from this idea of not fuck it up, it's a project that you have started with this character, with this world. But I think that you have mentioned that the idea behind this novel had been resting in a drawer. You had done some research because there's an interesting part of it, a very authentic side to the shops. It's a very tactile novel, so to speak. It really reflects the ambience in the streets, the music, the heat, the materials that you could find then. And that means a lot of research. This is not just presenting a historic context or social context, but also that type of details that really bring the story to life throughout the development of the plot. Those situations, those news, do you keep them all in different drawers until you find the way of continuing the story, of transforming the story into a book?
I have various ideas over time, and if they stay with you, they're arguing for their importance. And so with Underground Railroad, I had the idea of making this metaphor into a real train in the year 2000, but I didn't think I was a good enough writer to pull it off, and I didn't think I was mature enough to pull it off. And so every time I finished a book, I would pull out my notes and think, am I ready? And the answer was always no, until 2014, when I figured I've been putting it off for so long that this is the time to do it. So if an idea stays with you, it's arguing for its viability. With the heist novel, actually, I thought it was 2014, but then I found a note from like 2012 just with the word fence. And I was like, what kind of, and nothing else, no story, just like the character of a fence. So I have to reconstruct what I was thinking. But I was writing The Underground Railroad. I couldn't write this heist novel. When my schedule was clear, I could have written The Nickel Boys or Harlem Shuffle. I chose The Nickel Boys just because Trump had got elected, and a lot of the themes about optimism and pessimism were closer to my psychology at the moment, and so the Nickel Boys made more sense. And when I was done with that, the heist novel was still there. I was very excited about it, so I went to it. I'm not someone who can work on more than one thing at once. I have one project, and I'm sort of obsessing about it, and then when that's done, I sort of hopefully have one or two ideas to work on next that I'm excited about.
Déjeme preguntarle.
Please allow me to ask what has to do Gabriel García Márquez with the Underground Railroad?
Well, I had the idea that I would make this metaphor of an underground train into something real. So it's a fantastic element. And then it can be either, I sort of see fantasy as like a dial, and there's like allegory, science fiction, magic realism, and depending on the project, I'm turning the dial up or down. So I had the characters, I had the premise, and then I was figuring what's the right voice or technique to present this fantastic world. I reread 100 Years of Solitude, which affected me very much when I was in high school. And in his magic realism, I found the right tool, this kind of deadpan fantasy. So crazy things are happening, but the narrator never breaks character. And in an interview with Garcia Marquez, he said he got that style from his grandmother, who would tell stories about their village and town. And there are a lot of fantastic elements, and you can never tell what was real or fake because she told it with a brick face. And so it seemed that Cora, the main character in Underground Railroad, will encounter many strange, bizarre incidents, but the narrator will never break character. And so that seemed to be the perfect way into the story. At various moments, it was more science fiction-y and the fantasy was more broad, but having that control with the narrator seemed to be the best bet. And so I was lucky that I went back to that book when I was trying to finalize the narrator's voice, and it was a really, a good choice, I thought.
Ok. Pues además de alguna de las referencias.
Aside from some of the references that you have mentioned, of course, Gabriel García Márquez, among others, and before I open the mics so that people in the audience can ask you questions, I would like to ask you to act as a critic here and to make some recommendations, whether it's a TV show or a movie, from one of the contemporary authors that interest you at the moment, whether from the United States or around the world.
Let's see. I've just been reading for research memoirs of former FBI agents and bank robbers, so I don't think you want those. But two great American books I read last year: Hernan Diaz Trust, Barbara Kingsolver's Demon Copperhead. I often go back to some of the shorter novels that helped me with the Nickel Boys. Julia Otsuka writes these really precise short novels that helped me figure out the form of the Nickel Boys. Mohsin Hamid is a book called Exit West. Also, very much exercise and control. So I think those are four people I'd recommend.
Mm-hmm. And y sobre televisión?
And what about TV shows? Because I want to insist on this, the Harlem Shuffle is like watching a TV show, and I'm sure that we will see it at some point turned into a script because it has the rhythm, the color, as if you were watching it on TV. What authors could you, or what series would you recommend? Like The Wire, for instance, which is a TV show that came to my mind. What are the things that interest you at the moment, whether in the platforms or in the movie theaters, that serve you as an inspiration?
Well, I mean, for me, the heist narrative is a film narrative. So I mentioned Ocean's 11. But there's not a lot of Ocean's 11 in the book because they were like rich, they're handsome, nice clothes. They can buy a $1 million electromagnetic pulse machine to knock out Las Vegas. So these guys are much more low tech. And so when I started the first book, I went back to the classic heist movies of Rififi, the books of the movies, Jean-Pierre Melville, Le Deuxième Souffle, Le Samurai, Red Circle. There's Stanley Kubrick's The Killing, Asphalt Jungle, and then there are a lot of great 70s crime movies. Charlie Varick, The Taking of Pelham 123, Dog Day Afternoon. So these movies where desperate dreamers are trying to go for their big jackpot, and it always goes wrong because when you get people involved, things tend to degrade pretty quickly.
Creo que tenemos un poco.
I think we have some time left. Excuse me. I'm losing my voice, sorry.
Para hacer alguna pregunta.
We have some time for questions now.
Y me salváis la vida.
And please do ask questions and you'll save my life.
I was really curious how you began writing. Like, when was the first time in your life or when you seriously thought, I really think I might want to write a novel? And how did you not get scared by a blank page? Yeah.
I was a kid who didn't like to leave the house and do sports, so I was always reading comic books and watching reruns of The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits. My mom would buy the annual Stephen King book, and it would make the rounds of my room, my sister's room. And I think I was in 11 or 12, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool to start write the X-Men or write novels about vampires and werewolves and people being killed in terrible ways. So I was very young when I thought it'd be cool to be a writer, but I wanted to write horror novels or comic books. Reading Garcia Marquez in high school showed me the link between genre and so-called literature. There's there was fantasy and all the things I just mentioned, and then also fantastic elements in this highbrow novel, 100 Years of Solitude. And so it seemed like there's a way I could use fantastic elements, or one could use fantastic elements for something pulpy and fun like a comic book, or something highbrow like 100 Years of Solitude. My apprenticeship as a writer was being a journalist. I learned how to be disciplined. I went freelance and had the time to work on my own stuff. But I think I really became a writer when my first novel didn't sell, and I got like 25 rejections. I was really broke, and I realized that I couldn't become a lawyer or a veterinarian or any other thing. Like, I hate lawyers, I hate animals. There's nothing else I could do except become a better writer, and maybe one day I'll be published. And so I became a writer by realizing that nothing else would make me whole. I had to just keep doing it till I got better, and then maybe it would work out.
Thank you.
¿Más?
Any other question?
Hi. I wondered, speaking of your era as a journalist for the Village Voice or any other media, what's the best concert or show do you remember reviewing? Something that really, really made a difference. Thank you.
We mentioned The Wire. Before The Wire, there was Homicide: Life on the Street. That David, I'm blanking on his last name, but the creator of The Wire worked on. It was a police procedural in United States. He also did a series called The Corner, which is about the drug trade in Baltimore. So before we had this constant stream of new TV shows, there was just new shows in the fall, and then a few things here and there. So it was great when something like, I'm blanking on the name of the writer's creator, but these really unique shows that are forerunners to what we see now all the time would come out. And I was very fortunate to come across them. I was always very excited. And then to see HBO, which was a big influence on me as a kid. I would watch A Clockwork Orange with my parents when I was like 10 or whatever, and also comedy specials of Richard Pryor and George Carlin. So it was cool to see sort of HBO find its identity, and I was sort of writing about shows in the early days when it was finding its new TV programming voice.
Hi. When you first started, expect the story to transform into a trilogy, and did you had a break between the two first books, or you just kept writing?
I halfway through the book, I kept coming up with these other stories for Carney. So instead of one heist, it became 3 stories, and then I kept coming up with more. So I knew it'd be 2 books. And if you do 2 books, you might as well do 3. Just yours, in it. So I finished Harlem Shuffle. I started the second book the next day, and I was like, this is crazy. So I just played video games for 2 months, and then I went back to it. And then the last part of your question?
Do you have a break like between the two?
Yeah, it was a bit insane. And so I finished the second book last spring, and then I decided, okay, the pandemic's over, I finished this book, I need to take a break, I'm gonna do some self-improvement stuff. So I took some cooking classes. I cooked a lot during the pandemic, so much that I got sick of cooking, so I thought maybe if I do some French cooking classes, it might revitalize me. Unfortunately, the human contact was a bit much for me. Like, I'm not used to being with strangers as much, so that didn't go well. And then the other thing I would do for self-improvement was get my driver's license. I grew up in New York. We have good transportation, and then I just felt bad for my wife. She's always like dropping the kids off at camp and doing the grocery shopping. So I thought I would just be a man for once and get my driver's license. So it was a journey I went on of self-discovery last year, and I think I've learned some lessons.
Did you learn to make bread as well?
I found like some sourdough starter that I put somewhere, like, and then 2 years later I was like, what is this thing? And
Ok. ¿Hay alguna pregunta más? Sí, aquí detrás.
Any other questions from the audience?
Hello. I wanted to know if you could explain us a little bit more about your creative process and also about your influences, not just authors, but on Harlem, on New York, or politics, or there's, I don't know, things you read, or that's it.
Sure, I mentioned a few things for the Harlem trilogy. There's a lot of crime movies I mentioned. Definitely, if there's one I would say go and see if you haven't, it's the original Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, where some robbers hijack a subway car and hold it for ransom, and it's full of just angry New Yorkers in the early 70s. So it's a really fun movie. In terms of my process, I'm a big outliner, so I have to know the beginning and the end before I start. Things can be fuzzy in the middle, but I have to know what the destination is. And so some people are like, oh, I just write every day and the muse comes flying through the window and tells me what to write. I live in New York City. The muse is like trapped on a subway train uptown. There's a lot of writers in Brooklyn who are hogging all the muses. So if I have an outline, what I'm going to do each day. Today I'm introducing the superintendent of the school. I'm introducing the main character's mother. I have an assignment and I'm moving through the book in a rational way. When I finished Harlem Shuffle and I started writing the second book, I realized that if I'm going to do 3 books, I should figure out what happens in the next book, the third book, and what's the ending of all 3 books. What's the final scene in the 1980s? And so I've been writing all through writing the second book, and now the third book, I'm writing to that last scene. And if I step back, it's not just 3 books, it's like one 1,100-page story of a man over 3 decades. But for me as a writer, I have to know what the ending is. So I'm a big outliner. I try to write 8 pages a week, and it can be Monday and Tuesday, and then Saturday and Sunday, or Wednesday through Sunday. But if I'm writing 8 pages a week, after a month, that's 30 pages. Some weeks you can't write. It's like Thanksgiving or somebody's fucking birthday. You got to go to a fucking birthday party. So you're not going to work that day. But if you can work the next day and catch up, eventually you'll finish this marathon of a novel. So keeping a steady pace, keeping a steady accumulation seems to work for me.
Okay.
Hello, good afternoon. I would like to make you a question. Do you feel that there is any kind of racism as a book writer? Because we see that in the United States, black people doesn't have the same rights as white people. Have you ever felt that way in your books when you want to publish something about your race, or it's independent?
Most countries are pretty racist, and America is no exception. In terms of the publishing climate for writers of color, it's better than it was 30 years ago, better than it was 60 years ago. I can write. My first novel was about elevator inspectors, which is not an expected topic for a black writer. But my publisher, read it and thought, here's this weirdo, it sounds like a cool book, I'm going to publish it. It's something that would not have been published in 1950 when there were more rules about what a black writer is supposed to do. But even though there are more writers of color working, more female writers getting published, publishing itself, there are very few black editors in the States. There are very few assistants of color who are coming up. And so, going back to the early theme of the book, we're making advances and then also falling back in other areas. So.
Okay. Aquí este señor.
I think we have one more question here from this gentleman, and I think that we are about to call it a day. Good afternoon. I wanted to ask a question regarding your creation process, your writing process. When you write, do you think only about the message that you want to convey and the way you want to convey it, or are you thinking also about the reader? And if that is the case, what is your type of reader?
When I wrote my first book, I thought my ideal reader would be like a weirdo black kid, teenager, who might come to a reading and think, oh, here's this weirdo, maybe I can do that. And then in my first reading I did in a bookstore, there were no teenagers there, because apparently they were not attracted by the idea of a book about elevator inspectors. So I don't think about the audience. I've gained and lost people with different books. So I gained people with my realistic book about growing up in the 80s called Sag Harbor, and then lost them when I wrote a zombie novel. And then I gained some with Underground Railroad. That was like my breakthrough in terms of a wider readership. And some of those readers did or did not sign up for the Nickel Boys, and some people who liked those two books will pick up this book. And maybe I'll gain some new people who like crime novels. So I don't think about the audience, because I can't predict it. And then in terms of theme or plot and character, they all go together. I mean, I have a premise, then I have to populate it with characters. I have to figure out where it takes place, when, how it's going to be told. Is the narrator very terse and simple? Does the narrator speak in complicated sentences with multiple clauses? Is the book funny? Is the book serious or sad? Is it first person? Is it one person telling the story? Is it a distance third person narrator? So before I start, I think it makes sense to me to figure out the voice it will be told in. And the more things I have planned before I start writing, the better shape I'm in when I get stuck or have made a wrong turn. So thanks so much. It was a really lovely time.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Gracias.
Thank you.
Que no se me olvide, creo que va a haber un rato para firma de libros justo aquí en la entrada de la fundación.